So, David, in this week's editorial of your Messenger magazine, you mention and you actually quote Donald Trump. So, what's all that about?
I do, because back in January, when he was at Davos, Switzerland, he said this: "We must reject the perennial prophets of doom and their predictions of the apocalypse, the heirs of yesterday's foolish fortune tellers." And a trigger went off in my head. Now, he was referring to the issue of climate change and how everybody's getting very serious and depressed about the future of the planet because of the climate and the changes to it. And, will this world have the ability to keep on going? But this phrase that people who trust in the predictions of the apocalypse are heirs of yesterday's foolish fortune tellers. I couldn't just sit there and say, "Oh, yeah, right, I like what you say." No. Because I immediately thought of the Sabbath school lessons we're studying on Daniel.
Absolutely. So, you use that as your opening statement. Obviously, we're studying Daniel for the whole of this quarter, and you're referring to this as an attack or a challenge to how we interpret, or people can interpret, the book of Daniel.
To be fair, Donald Trump didn't have Daniel in his mind at all.
No.
But I think that what he said, and if you look at the deeper statement that's being said there, people who trust apocalyptic prophecy, we're not heirs of yesterday's foolish fortune tellers. We're actually heirs of ancient words that we believe still to be true.
And he also mentions about prophets of doom as well. And, there are many people out there who predict certain things. But as Adventists, as in the book of Daniel, we can find that, especially in the prophetic aspects of Daniel, yes, there are areas where you might agree that there are areas where he talks about doomful things, but ultimately it is a message of hope and freedom and oneness with God, ultimately when Christ comes.
You and I have known Daniel since we were in Sabbath school, 5 years old, 6 years old, and we heard the stories of Daniel's in the lion's den, Daniel on the plain of Dura and his friends refusing to bow down to the image. They were great stories that have shaped us and shaped our characters to where we are today. And Daniel 1 to 6 has as much significance as Daniel 7 to 12 for today's Christian. Because Daniel 1 to 6 show how young people, teenagers, and when you get a bit older as well, how we react and respond to a godless world. And how we can stay faithful to God even when the pressures of that world are against us, and how we react hopefully, joyfully, kindly, graciously, not sort of with great anger. Do you ever read in chapters 1 to 6 where the God-like people, the people who are still faithful to their God tradition, where they reacted with anger and force? No. What I read from Daniel chapter 1 is when Daniel's captured in Babylon, he's as gracious and as kind and as generous spirited as you could ever be, except he, at the same time, is faithful to God.
Well, you touch on that, but looking at your editorial, you actually go into quite some deep theological aspects as well, and a historicist point of view that as Adventists we look at as well, and how we interpret Scripture, how we interpret prophecy, rather. But you mention about the limitations of the historicist perspective. Do you feel that there are other options or other ways in which we could interpret Scripture?
I'm a pastor, not a theologian, first point. Adventists have traditionally interpreted Daniel through the historicist tradition, or the historicist approach to understanding Daniel Revelation, where you let the text speak for itself and draw out of the text the interpretation of the prophecy.
Right.
And we have people who follow in great tradition. We are the heirs of people like Sir Isaac Newton, who is in the town where I live, Grantham. He's famous for his physics and mathematics, but he wrote more theology than maths and physics. And he was a historicist. And we have followed in that tradition. And it has a lot going for it, as I said in the previous editorial. But there is a conversation going on in the Adventist community about whether we are digging deep enough into Scripture, into the text itself, that we've got our understanding as accurate as perhaps it might be. Because sometimes we have a temptation, just a temptation, to impose history on the text. And I'm raising these as questions, still wants to be faithful to our tradition, but I can't be in denial that there's a conversation going on in our academic community. Scholars, good, honest, serious scholars, are saying, is it possible to give more than one interpretation to a sign or a symbol in Daniel? Now, the historicist position does not permit that, but I'm just working through the tensions that exist in our community of faith.
Sure. Well, as Adventists, we will look at the prophetic aspects of Daniel, and we will claim that we have a pretty good understanding of what the symbols and the interpretations are. There may be some misunderstandings or some unclarity with regards to certain prophecies, like, Daniel chapter 12 or 11. But generally, we will say that we are the church that has this opportunity to share with others this message, which is an open book now for us. And I think what you're saying is right, that coupled with that is to avoid being relaxed about the whole thing and to think that, well, we understand everything, and therefore shut off any further willingness to go deeper into the text and look at other parallel meanings that may apply to us personally and also prophetically as well.
Absolutely. So we want to go deeper into the text and try and let the text speak for itself. And then secondly, to try and make sure that Daniel leads us to Christ. Let me put it the other way. Christ knew about Daniel. He read Daniel. And though he doesn't expound on it expansively, he knew Daniel. So is he also at the center of this apocalyptic writing? And is he center to the text and his kingdom, his world?
So we're talking about Christ here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, absolutely. And I think that is the whole crux of it, isn't it? That everything, Daniel chapter 2 is about Christ and his eternal kingdom. Daniel chapter 7, it turns to Christ and his kingdom. But it also, as you mentioned earlier, reveals a God who is in control of everything.
So imagine a group of 21st century Christ followers taking those ancient words yet again, looking at it with fresh understanding. What does this passage have to say to me today?
And I think that is the important question.
Absolutely.
So I hope that when we read the editorial, we'll be challenged to ask ourselves that question.
We are not fools.